Hi, my name is Susan Doyle from Box Media and I will be the moderator today. I'd like to welcome you to Lean Construction Ireland's 22nd webinar, the topic of which is benchmarking, presented by Denis Leonard from Graham. Apologies for the delay with the start of the webinar. We had some technical issues which have now been resolved. If you have a question, please type it in the question box and we will consolidate and ask Denis in the second half of the webinar. If there are any questions that we don't get answered during the webinar, we will follow up by email afterwards. The agenda will be as follows: presentation by Denis Leonard, followed by questions and answers. The webinar has been brought to you today by Lean Construction Ireland in conjunction with our media and communication partners, Box Media. For today's webinar, the title is Benchmarking. The speaker for today is Denis Leonard from Graham. Denis has a degree in construction engineering, an MBA and PhD in business and management, quality management, is a fellow of the Chartered Quality Institute, fellow of the American Society for Quality and a member of the Chartered Institute of Building. A certified Lean practitioner and certified Six Sigma Black Belt. He has experience with Lean, Six Sigma, ISO 9001, ISO 14001, ISO 44001 and the EFQM criteria. He has worked with quality management in the construction industry for 15 years in commercial, civil engineering and home building. He is the manager of the integrated management systems for Graham. I'll pass you over to Denis to start the presentation.
Thanks so much, Susan, and thanks everyone for attending today. Welcome to this webinar on benchmarking. In overview, I wanted to first of all set the context and define what benchmarking is, what we mean by that. Then get into how we can actually benchmark, what are some of the tools and approaches to doing that. Talk a little bit about my experiences with benchmarking, provide you with resources so you can actually have some tools and data sets to use to get you started in terms of resources, and then we'll get into a Q&A, and there are some takeaways. There's a paper and a book that we'll provide to those attending live today at the end of the session. So what is benchmarking? This is a bit of a mouthful of a definition, but it's worth looking at this and thinking about this to set the context. So benchmarking is a technique in which an organization or a company measures its performance against that of best-in-class companies to determine how those companies achieve their performance levels and uses that information to improve its own performance. And the subjects can be benchmark, including strategies, operations, and processes. We can get into the details of those later. But bottom line, it's about being able to establish who are the best in class, and that becomes the benchmark for you to aim for. And that's not just best in class, for example, in construction, it could be in home building, it could be in civil engineering, and it could be in a specific facet within that as well. So it's whatever you consider best in class to be. And it's not just within an industry at that sort of a micro level, but it can be outside the industry. And we'll get into that as we go on. So why do organizations benchmark? Bottom line, they benchmark to improve profits. What's the bottom line? But within that, there's a whole range of reasons why organizations want to get involved in benchmarking. It could be to accelerate and manage change. It could be setting goals, not just goals, but stretch goals that are really going to challenge the organization. It can be about achieving breakthroughs and innovations, that thinking out of the box. It can be about creating a sense of urgency. Here's what others are doing that we really need to pick up and move along here quickly. And it can also help with the "it's not invented here" syndrome. In my experience, within the construction industry, again, within those different sectors of the construction industry, there is a lot of, is it done in this industry? Because if it's not done in this industry, it really doesn't apply. We're such a unique industry. And particularly with quality, Lean, Six Sigma, and so on, the concept that, well, those things happen in and were championed in are much easier to be managed and to be run in manufacturing is something that comes up time and time again. So while obviously there are differences in our industry, there's also a lot of commonality, and one can adapt the tools to the industry. So The seen outside the box and the not invented here syndrome can be broken by benchmarking. But ultimately, it's about understanding, well, what is world class? We all like to think that we're really good at what we do, but the purpose of benchmarking helps us figure out, are we actually as good as we think? And what are those goals? Where do we really sit in terms of benchmarking? Are we best in industry? Are we best in country? Are we best in a particular aspect of what we do, like design, construction? Are we literally at a world-class level in some of the things that we do? Because if we don't have the data, then we really just don't know. And so, this cartoon jokes about, market research says that customers are a vague, mysterious phenomena who buy our product randomly for no reason whatsoever. It's a sort of field of dreams, build it and they will come concept, rather than do we really know ourselves? Do we know who we are, and do we know who we're competing against? Do we understand the wider context of the environment in which we're working? And this actually ties nicely into things like SWOT analysis. You really don't know what you know what your strengths are and your weaknesses are internally, but if you're not aware of the wider community and the wider market in which you're working, your competitors, your clients, it's really hard to forgive. I'm going to constantly use the pun throughout here, constantly come back to that term of benchmarking. So we'll just take a look at some definitions that are much more down to earth and much more fundamental. So benchmarking is the search for those best practices. That's the key phrase, the best practices that will lead to a superior performance of the organization, of the company. And that's by Robert Camp, who literally wrote the book back in 1989 on benchmarking. Or benchmarking is the continuous process of measuring, and that's products, services, and practices against the toughest competitors or those recognized as leaders in any field. And again, these are definitions. No one's expected to have these in the tip of your tongue. But if you start breaking them down, within those definitions are the cores of what we're trying to do within benchmarking. So it's about best practices. It's about continuous improvement, about process and measuring. And it's about products, services, and practices in any field. And then finally, that was the CEO of Rank Xerox. And then finally, APQC, or the American Productivity and Quality Center, define it as the practice of being, and I think this is a really interesting one, being humble enough to admit that somebody else out there could be better at something than us, and that we're wise enough to actually learn how to match and even surpass them at that. So I think there's some real nuggets in there of the real fundamental purpose of benchmarking. Now, around that concept of not just learning how to match, but even surpass those leaders or those best in class or world in class is actually an important concept. This is a really simple little diagram just to express that. But if you consider where your pre-benchmarking status is, and you've got world class, the blue line there, the best in class or world class benchmark. So we're learning from those. You're able to say, here's our key metrics. This is what we're going to do to improve. Benchmarking isn't actually about meeting or getting to their level. It's about exceeding that and going beyond that. And then you, ultimately, the whole aspiration here is that you become the benchmark leader. So if that's what benchmarking is, and we're setting that in context, if we then take a look at the different types of benchmarking. So at the high level, there's strategic benchmarking. And this is where you're certainly looking across the world-class organizations anywhere in the world, who's the best at what they do. And again, this is not just who's the best at in building, or if we take it outside the industry. Who's the best in car manufacturing, who's the best in whatever that happens to be. But it's actually breaking it down and saying, well, who's actually the best in logistics? Who's actually the best in packaging? Who's actually the best in communications? Who's the best in marketing? Who's the best at customer satisfaction within their industry, whatever the industry is? And then again, do we pull that back and look at within our industry, within the geography, within Ireland, within Dublin? So it's looking at those world-class organizations and what are the opportunities for strategic change. So it's looking at major shifts in that market out there. Who are the new entrants to the market? This is Porter's 5 basically, but what's happening? What are the economic impacts and how can we look at that? Another way to think about the strategic level is it's essentially helping you do scenario planning. What are the changes coming up? Brexit, obviously. What are the changes coming up and what can we learn from the wider community about what we need to do to be ready for change? The other thing is, if you don't start at the strategic level, then what you could end up doing with the performance level or the process or functional level is you actually end up sort of moving chairs potentially around the deck of the Titanic. It's there's no use doing a process of small fundamental process change or trying to improve a particular performance indicator if in 6 months that entire product line or that entire sector of the market is something that you're leaving. So starting first at the strategic level to first of all understand the organization and where's the most important place for you to focus your efforts of improvement, or combined with that, literally looking at benchmarking from a strategic point of view. You can then go down to the next level and say, well, what are the key performance indicators? Maybe you just want to look at that. Where do we fit relatively compared to the indicators or metrics of the other best in class? Where are our gaps? And very often, we essentially know where we think we're weak, but sometimes, again, I said this earlier, where you think you're strong, you might actually realize there's a significant gap there between you and your competitors. And finally, the process or the functional, the very nuts and bolts, boots on ground, individual process elements. So it's looking at what are the key fundamental processes of what we do, how do we function, and how do we function in comparison to those best practice companies. And so it's really about, so those are the gaps, what do we do about them, how do we actually address it? So again, if you then start from the bottom moving up, what do we do about this? Those are the actual put in place implementations that allow you to drive those key performance measures that then strategically help you in your marketplace. So how do we benchmark? Again, this is from the APQC, or the American Productivity and Quality Center in the US. It's a play on the Plan, Do, Check, Act. It's plan, collect, analyze, and adapt. And it's a nice, simple little cycle. And what this is basically saying fundamentally is that at this stage, which you would actually spend almost the majority of your time in the planning stage, is trying to figure out and study what are the key measures, what are the key things that we want to address here? What's the context? So that's back to that strategic level. And then what is the data and the tools that we need to use to gather this? How do we conduct the research? And how do we identify those best practice organizations? That's very much the performance, and then also the process or function. What are the specifics that we want to look at here and examine? You can get into the danger of just, if you simply pick an organization, even if it's a great organization, you can quickly pick that organization and say, let's go, let's get 5 people from the company. We've got an agreement to go in. They're happy to take us on a tour and have a presentation and answer some questions. You can just quickly jump into that, and that's going to take time. It could be an hour, it could be 3 hours with a company, or a day. But as you can imagine, you could quickly come back and realize that you didn't ask the right questions, you didn't have the right data, and you're not going to get back in again. So taking the time to plan what you're doing is very important. And again, considering this in lines with Plan, Do, Check, Act, the benchmarking is supposed to be an inherent part of your larger strategic plan, your larger lean plan of improvement. So it's a tool, it's an action as part of that. It shouldn't be an isolated thing. In terms of collect, it's literally that's on site. So that could be collecting the data remotely, or it could be going and doing the benchmark visit. And again, this is about trying to learn from the best. And this is about, potentially, this is actually the least amount of time. It's actually the collection of that data, the experience of being there and doing the visit. And then you're analyzing that data. So what is the data? How does it align to us? But again, this goes back to the planning stage. you will have at the planning stage figured out the information and the key processes, the key things that you want to examine. And when you've actually went to that organization or that other source to get that information, there's an immediate alignment, and you're actually trying to align those KPIs or those key performance metrics or those processes to what you do. So when you analyze, it's then easier to enable you to start aligning those processes of that performance. You can then quickly also get into a final report. What are the key findings? What's the real knowledge transfer here? And this analyze stage is also the preparation of the planning to put this into practice. So it's the development of an action plan. It's and any adaptation that's going to be needed. And then how do we actually implement this? And then finally, the adaptation is the adapt and the implementation. So how do we actually make something happen as a result of what we've learned? And then what do we do to continue to improve that? And what's the next opportunity? Again, benchmarking should be part of a larger process of improvement of quality within the organization. In terms of tips, the starting point is back to identifying those key areas within your organization that you could have a significant impact on, that needs to be improved. It's about making sure you analyze that, all of the processes and activities and the metrics that are needed, so that you understand yourself and what that issue is, so that when you go to that other organization, you're able to relate to them quickly and easily. And it's very much about apples to apples. The key problem I've seen over the years with benchmarking and with performance is, people talk about apples to apples, and sometimes it's apples and oranges, but sometimes it's apples, oranges, bananas, and pineapples. They're just vastly different. And sometimes that communication, those metrics can be so different that the communication is really difficult, and it's really hard to get the learning. So doing the advanced work is really worth it. So all of that allows you to have accurate benchmark questions so you can engage effectively. The other thing is, it's treat the whole benchmarking experience, this whole process, as though it's project management. So it's selecting the right team members. It's about establishing the responsibilities, the timelines, the milestones, the rollout, and the assessment of the impact. So just like doing a Six Sigma or a Lean project, it needs to be run in the same way. All of that, particularly that structure, helps avoid what a colleague of mine used to call industrial tourism, where if you say, I remember in the States, there was a company that had a chance to go along and meet with senior management of Disney in Florida, and people were fighting over the opportunity to get on those slots. There were 10 slots. It was going to be 3 days away in Florida in the winter from a northern state company, and they were fighting over who wanted to go, which obviously is not the point. So it's not about, let's just go to a company, see what's going on, see the good stuff, and you come back. And even if you're inspired, even if you picked up some things, if it's just that unstructured, it's so easy for that just to simply all fade away, and there's nothing then tangible comes out of it. So those are some of the tips to help make it a successful change, and to make sure that the gaps are actually addressed. This is just to provide an overview of some of the quality Lean Six Sigma tools and techniques that one can use when you're looking at benchmarking. And if you break it down into a couple of ways, so for example, if you break it down into planning, data acquisition, the analysis, the integration, the action, and the maturity. Maturity basically means continuing to keep that going and improving and moving on to the next project in terms of benchmarking. This is a nice way to help you think about the various tools could be used from focus groups, and that can be within your organization. It could be your clients, to get a focus group together to find out not about what your perception is, but what your clients, your supply chain, your partners, what they actually think about you. You're taking your flow charts, your value stream mapping, looking at radar charts and control charts, Pareto diagrams, Pareto diagrams will stop there in terms of looking at data, the cause and effect of really trying to get down to root cause. So it's about understanding as much of the issue in your process as possible before you, again, go on the visit or start the trying to implement a change. Failure mode effectiveness analysis and cost of quality. In terms of implementation, which tends to be one of the biggest problems with benchmarking, you get out there, you get all the information, you bring it back. So it's about, had you originally the right goals? What is it you were trying to achieve in terms of Six Sigma and DMAIC? Did you define that clearly at the start in terms of the planning? Were you looking at the right metrics, and did you gather the right metrics when you were out there gathering the data or on the benchmark visit? And then what were the right actions to put that in place? Because what you're really talking about there is change management, or here it talks about strategic change management to improve competitiveness. So it's about how you harness all of this together. And again, I'll go back to it, really has to be part of a larger strategic plan. When we're looking at what are the problems, so what can we learn from benchmarking and how can we do that right? There's a survey conducted by the Benchmarking Exchange in the US, and they're saying, well, let's just break this down a little bit. If you look at the center column there, so 272 responded by saying that was a key issue. That's lack of human resources to implement changes. That's not a surprise, because that's a problem with everything we do. Do we have the right number of people on board? Do we have the resources to do it in terms of people? The next to the right is lack of financial resources. Again, that's a fundamental project issue. But if we then take at the far right, 180 people had talked about communicating results, and that is something that we literally, regardless of people and finances, we can make a difference. How well are we communicating the results? And this goes back to, are we communicating why we're doing this in the first place? Do people actually know what our strategic plan is, what we're trying to do this year, and that this benchmarking was part of a wider plan, and what we're trying to roll out with this. So if the communications don't go right, you go back over to those two bars on the far left. Acceptance of results by senior executives and acceptance of results by department heads, that's not going to work. So the communication, this being part of a wider plan, is key, because if they're bought in at the start, they understand why you're doing this, and benchmarking is about helping us achieve what we wanted to do in terms of the various departments within the organization, then they're going to buy into it and say, well, this is a way to help us do all of those great things we talked about earlier: learn, know the gaps, drive change quicker, and so on. So, experiences. I just wanted to mention 4 things. Bewley's and Coke, this is probably going back almost 20 years, but I remember talking to, it was a senior executive at Bewley's and a senior executive of Coke Northern Ireland, and they were talking about process improvement and quality management, and they were talking about, you know, no matter what it is, whether it's a book or it's a benchmarking visit or it's working with another partner, if you get one good idea, it's worth it. And they were talking about the fact that colleagues had been surprised that the two organizations had worked together on a particular project, because they were, for a couple of reasons. First of all, they thought, well, it wouldn't work for benchmarking because you're not doing the same thing. It's not the same product. But it worked really well because, first of all, they were not direct competitors, but they were in the same market. They were in the beverage market. And what they were looking at this time, something that really gelled with both of them, was looking at the cleaning of the delivery systems. So all of the pipes and everything else that goes into those systems to allow to deliver the water and the syrup and the tea and so on, how can those be cleaned quickly and efficiently? Are there things we can learn from each other there? And that's exactly what they did focus on. That's exactly what they got learning out of. VH and Trek, that's Viridian Homes, a home builder in the US, and that was with Trek Bikes in Wisconsin. And this again was about two organizations that are now very different organizations. There's nothing in common. And there were a couple of reasons why the benchmarking trip happened. One was inspiration. We're trying to do a change approach. They were trying to raise themselves to the next level. Viridian had won a number of national awards across the US. And it was now about, let's not rest on our laurels. What can we do? So going to track was a way to look outside the industry and get inspired. But when they were actually there, there's people welding, and there's people doing other things that you could relate back to home building, literally in terms of like 5S. So how are they laying out things? How are they handing over things? Safety. But of course, on the other side, track are doing general things like employee satisfaction and customer satisfaction, and communicating to customers. So there are still things that could be relatable, but to some extent it was about, let's just go and get inspired about what we could do. The National Quality Builder Council, I was on that council for a number of years. And again, that was about very much apples to apples. That was saying we're only looking for not national builders, but local builders that are family-owned, independent organizations building between 100 and 500 homes a year. And then we want to be from different states so that nobody was going to be a direct competitor, but the products were very, very similar. And then how can we actually work together to share about everything, the strategy, the processes, the metrics, who are the best practices, who are the best metrics. But that's where we came back to the apples and apples, that every single builder had a slightly different way of looking at their numbers. And it was actually really difficult. So we had to come up with a combined Rosetta Stone of, we all have our own numbers. There was a conversion to come up with a compatible National Quality Builder set of metrics and scorecards. So this is a piece of information from the paper that's going to be sent out after the webinar. What we're looking at here is, this was one survey that I'd done with a colleague, research published in the US. We looked at 21 builders across the USA. But it was only 21 builders, that's still 42,000 homes that were built that year by those builders. That actually was 9.6% of homes built across the US in that year. So not a bad sample size. And this is just looking at a series of key metrics. And what we did was we broke them down into quality practitioners and non-quality practitioners. Non-quality practitioners, they're not literally using any quality tools, techniques, Six Sigma, lean, process improvement. But they actually were a good set of builders. They were well-respected builders. But if you look down there, you can see some key numbers breaking out, like the actual cycle time per homes for question 6. The quality practitioners were at 96 days of an average for working days, and it was 103 for the non-quality builders. That's 7 days. I mean, think of the work and effort you would do to take one day out of a cycle time in construction. So there's 7 days sitting right there. It's the same when you look at cost over budget. It was 935 versus 1,592 between the quality and non-quality builders. Cost variance was 0.73 compared to 0.97. So this is just an example of taking very like organizations, pulling the metrics together and seeing, as you can see here, I know you're not going to read this. You'll get the paper after the webinar, but what you've got here is a set of questions, and on the left, these questions are turned into metrics. On the left of the bars, you have the minimum. On the right, you have the maximum. We have an average, we have a mode or a most often used, and then we even have a benchmark, another benchmark number. These are by third-party customer satisfaction organizations or other research-based organizations in construction. And so what these builders were able to do is go in and see, where do I fit? Am I at the high end? Am I the leader in this? Sorry, am I the minimum end? Am I the leader in this in terms of cycle time? Am I the slowest in terms of cycle time within this group of 21 national builders? Am I average? And how do I improve? And how do I fit with a larger benchmark? So it was providing information, and it was also therefore setting a goal. Where's my gap? Where do we really need to improve? And then how do we focus on that to drive improvement? To try to give you some resources, there's the Construction Industry Key Performance Indicators report. That comes out through Glenigan here in the UK. And that's a report that's been going for about 13 years now. And it's been produced by Glenigan, the CITB, Construction Industry Training Board, and Constructing Excellence. And it's a UK report, 13 years, and there's a wide range of data that you can get out of that. It's free, by the way, if you follow that link. So if we look, for example, at client satisfaction by product and service, you can actually see how things have been varying over the years, but allows you to see, well, what are our client satisfaction scores in terms of the service we delivered, how we were interacting with the client, and the product we delivered. I should say, if you look at the left-hand side, if you look at the scale, this is really blowing up, because this is not 0 to 100. This is just looking at the 76% to 92% and the 66 to 86. It's looking at a very narrow range. So it looks more dramatically variable than it is. But again, here's some specific metrics for this industry that you can take a look at and then compare yourself to. Here's another one from the same report. This is looking at predictability time. So this is the actual time that was predicted to take for a construction phase and how long it actually took. And this then was a key performance indicator for projects. This one is about impacted handover. So just how significant were the impacts, and and how impactful in a negative way were impacts on the handover. And again, this is a compressed scale if you look over on the left-hand side. But it's a good way to provide key information for you to take a look and say, well, how do we fit? Are we best in class? Now, if we go outside the industry and we're looking at manufacturing, particularly since we're talking about lean here today, this is a link to the Industry Week Best Plants Winners report. This was the 2013 through 17, but this has been going on for many, many years. There's earlier reports. So this allows you to look at very micro things like how many of these plants, by the way, these are, we're talking about Ford and Toyota and so on across the US. What are these manufacturing plants, production plants, what are they using in terms of theory to constraints? Are they using the Toyota production system, for example? The extent to which lean manufacturing has been implemented, or Six Sigma. You can then break it down into, well, what sort of tools are being used in these, again, world-class best benchmark organizations, whether it's Six Sigma, quality management at a very broad level, employee problem-solving teams, statistical process control, design of experiments. So you can, and at the bottom there's first pass yield, in other words, zero defects first time. So there's a lot of data here at the manufacturing level to see how you can compare. Here's the adoption of 5S, level scheduling, value stream mapping. Here's an interesting one on scrap or rework as a percentage of sales. Now, if you want to go, this is another resource, again, a free link by this to the Baldrige, the US National Quality Award website. And there's free reports on there since 1998. All of the award-winning applications are on there. And you can go in and get all sorts of information about how does Caterpillar listen to customers? How does Motorola benchmark themselves in terms of customer satisfaction? And this is not necessarily even looking at the number, but saying, oh, I like the way that's articulated, I like the way that they're trying to articulate. I'm satisfied and very satisfied, and compared to the benchmark that we're comparing ourselves to out there. This was St. Mary's Medical Care. Again, they use almost like a readout on a heart monitor to articulate their metrics. And here's just a chart that MESA, which is to do cathode protection products in the US, how they're trying to, where do they fit as an organization in providing value to their clients in terms of their product. In terms of other benchmarking tools and comparisons, in terms of resources, the Centre for Competitiveness, which has offices in both Dublin and Belfast, is a good resource in terms of being able to connect you with people and tools and data sets. And you can actually, there's a score that you can go in and provide data, and they'll actually benchmark you against other sectors. Here's a link to a short 5-minute little video on benchmarking through the American Society for Quality. Again, it's free, but it's an easy little thing to simply email out to a group. And what all of this is doing today, what I'm doing today, is to raise the issue and the discussion of what is benchmarking, how do you use it, what it can do, and also to provide some key resources in terms of the tools, the techniques, the data sets, the support mechanisms that are out there. And again, at the end of the webinar, there'll be an email out with a link to a copy of a benchmarking book. It's actually benchmarking for hospitals. I do know this is about the construction industry, but 90% of that book is actually about the process and discipline of how to benchmark. And a paper that I'd mentioned earlier on benchmarking in the construction industry. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, do feel free to contact me. And if there are any questions right now, I'd be happy to take those. Thank you.
Denis, Gary Widger here from Lean Construction Ireland. Look, firstly, thank you very much for a really interesting presentation. I think a lot of companies have put a huge amount of focus into how they can improve their own operations without maybe taking the time to look outside and see what other companies are doing. So it's a great eye-opener for us, and thank you. I have a couple of questions in here, Denis. So the first one, in almost like the dating game question, have you any advice on how to find a benchmarking partner?
Well, it's maybe in terms of dating, it's who are those that you've got something in common with? And this is obvious, but if you're at an LCI event, you already have things in common. You're in the industry, you want to change, and you've got an interest in Lean and the tools. So right there, you've instantly got people you can start working with. There certainly is then that discussion of, are we a direct competitor? Are we local to each other? Are there things in common that we'd like to work on and share together? But it's literally that as a starting point. As I said, you can get into the danger of going, let's do a benchmarking tour to Guinness. That sounds like a really good idea. But other than a good time at the Guinness plant in Dublin, it's what are we really going to get out of this? And so it can be really fundamental things, it can be short focused things. But the Centre for Competitiveness, again in Dublin and Belfast, is a good place to reach out to. Again, that allows you to look outside the industry. But I'm still, some of these examples I talked about today are from people that I met and worked with 10, 15 years ago, and we're still in touch. A lot, if you've won awards, again, that's something I've done in the past where we've, if you're an award winner with another organization, you get a chance to meet and greet them. And then you've got things in common. So what could we share? And so I worked with an organization that actually had a cadre of 7 award-winning organizations, and they would literally informally share things with each other. So if they're trying to improve something, whether it's customer satisfaction or a delivery time or a logistics issue or a defects issue, they would send an email out to the point people at each of those organizations and say, here's something we're dealing with. Have you dealt with any of these issues? And what they would normally do is they would email you back with a process or a tool or a template or something that's worked for them. But it was about being reciprocal with that. So then when one of them emailed you, you provided the information. So there's a range of ways in which you can make this work.
Okay, very good, Denis. And it sounds like there's a lesson there. If you find a good partner, keep the relationship going, and you can keep on tapping into to get more insights across other areas.
Yes.
Very good. So a second question here. What are the standout benefits or insights that you've seen as a result of benchmarking?
Well, I'm thinking of one organization where this is home building, where it was literally about being able to take a week off the cycle time, and it was working with a company that had gone through the extreme home makeover process. Have you ever seen that on TV? But it was learning lessons from them and saying, so how did you dramatically change the process of what you're trying to do? And of course, there was no silver bullet. It was lots of little things that had changed. But by taking those lessons learned, bringing it over as part of an improvement project, again, it wasn't just some, let's have a conversation or let's meet for drinks. It was about, there's a project we need, there's a goal to drive this cycle time down. They took 5 working days out of that cycle. So that was a significant one. In terms of larger commercial construction, I've seen a company literally just eliminate a process it was doing and literally come up, use a blank sheet of paper and create a brand new process. And that was about thinking outside the box. That wasn't about can we reduce the cycle time? Can we take some key pieces out of the process? Can we look at consecutive working or leveling? It was literally about a blank sheet of paper and here's a new way we should think about this. But you know, the other things that I've seen that are much sort of quicker and easier to come out of benchmarking are just breaking a mindset. So, for example, if you're going to an organization, you can get inspired, or you can think, you know, we can really do this. And I know one organization that was set its goals to win a national industry award, and there was a feeling of that's really beyond our grasp. We're really overstretching. And by going and visiting another organization that was outside this industry, that really made people feel, you know, we can do this. And they got inspired by it. And it was a way for the leader of that organization to get buy-in and have a common theme and just get people excited about driving for a goal for improvement.
Okay, it sounds like it's tying into the stretch goals you were referring to in the presentation.
Yes.
One more for you, Dennis. Probably it's the reverse. Have you seen any problems or issues arising within companies as a result of benchmarking? Have there been downsides?
There's a little bit of kill the messenger sometimes, because if you know, I have seen those organizations going out there thinking they're really good and being really shocked at what they found, that they were not as good as they thought, and that didn't go over well. But there's usually a moment of reflection or a week of reflection, and then coming back to, okay, well, if that's the case, it's better we know that. So what do we do? What do we do to improve? And again, it's not just that. It's about, well, when we were there, we've got this data, we've learned something to bring back. So we actually have the tools now to try to start to make an improvement. And this doesn't mean, you know, we're going to be as good as Facebook or whatever, but it's, you know, if there's any improvement that comes out of that, back to Coke and Bewley's, it was about, you know, if there's any improvement, it was worth it. And so that's one problem. The other problem can be, you know, again, it's industrial tourism. It seems like a great idea. We did the visit. It took a whole day and it was great, but nothing actually happened. We didn't actually do anything with it. It sort of sat there and there was no motivation, there was no infrastructure in place to make it happen. And that can be a killer, because then the next time that idea comes up, it's, well, it didn't work the last time. So those are, you know, really fundamentals. The last word on this, you know, I'll basically say, it comes back to that benchmarking is not a silver bullet that's going to solve everything on its own. It needs to be part of a wider plan. And if it is part of a wider plan, it really can quickly help you drive that learning curve up quickly by literally go out there, take that learning, come back and apply it.
Okay, thanks, Dennis. And here's a final question for you. If in your career you were never allowed benchmark again, if it was taken away from you, what would you miss the most?
It's the contacts. You know, I've people that I email on a regular basis that you ask obviously appropriate questions. But I have friends in the UK, in Ireland, in Australia, in America, and Canada that I can reach out to. I've got this informal resource group out there that I can reach out to across industries and say, I did this recently. Have you seen anybody in the industry using FMEA, failure modes and effective analysis? Or, you know, do you have data on customer satisfaction numbers, or what defect numbers? So that's what I'd miss. It would suddenly be like sort of losing your email or something, or losing access to the internet. It really does provide this resource for you.
Very, very, very good. It sounds like it's the first step in building a network of excellence almost.
Great way to put it.
Good. So look, folks. It's we're very. I think we're up at the hour mark. So just on behalf of LCI Ireland, I'd really like to thank Denis for his insightful presentation. I think his preparation and most of all his delivery, I found it very convincing and very inspiring. A copy of this webinar will be sent out to everyone that's attended. The next LCI webinar will take place in September, and information on that will be published shortly via our LinkedIn and MailChimp distribution list. I'd also like to thank Box Media once again for putting the webinar together. Box Media, our media and communications partner. And then finally, thanks again, Denis. We really appreciate your time. It was a great webinar, and on behalf of Lean Construction Ireland, thank you. To all the people who attended today, you can follow us on Lean Construction Ireland on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and our website. So to all of you, have a safe rest of the day and go out there and be lean. Thank you.